All right. So have you ever heard someone say something like, get over slavery already?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like one of those phrases that just stops you in your tracks.
It really is.
We're going to try to unpack all of that today. And like the psychology behind a statement like that.
Yeah.
We actually found a podcast that did a deep dive on this. So that's what we're going to be looking at today.
Okay.
And one of the things that they talk about was a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain what that is?
Cognitive dissonance is basically when you have two conflicting thoughts or beliefs in your mind.
Okay.
And it creates this like mental discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And so an example of that would be like if you believe that society is fair and just.
Okay.
You know, we have a just system. Everybody has an equal opportunity.
The American dream.
The American dream. Right. But then you're also presented with evidence that there are these racial disparities.
Huge disparity.
Huge disparities, like in wealth, in healthcare, education.
Everywhere you look.
Everywhere you look. Right. And so those two things clash. That belief that we have a just world and then the reality of racial inequality, and that causes cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So like those two things are butting heads.
Exactly.
And so then what happens?
So then what happens is sometimes people will change their beliefs to match reality.
Okay.
Or a lot of times what happens is motivated reasoning.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So like instead of changing what they believe, they kind of like force the facts to fit what they already think.
Exactly. It's like this defense mechanism to protect your worldview.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is that kind of how this get over slavery thing comes into play?
Absolutely. It's easier to downplay the impact of slavery and just be like, oh, that was so long ago, get over it.
Right.
Than it is to like really grapple with the fact that maybe the system is not as fair and just as we thought it was.
And there's this whole theory called system justification theory, right?
Yeah.
Kind of goes into that.
Yeah. So system justification theory basically states that we as humans have this deep-seated need to see the systems that we live in as being fair and legitimate.
So even when we see tons of evidence to the contrary,
we
still want to believe that it's a fair system.
We want to believe that it's a fair system.
Why is that?
I think because it's really uncomfortable to think that the system that we live in is flawed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, it kind of shakes the foundation of our beliefs.
Yeah, nobody wants to admit that they're wrong.
Exactly.
So is that why we hear things like slavery ended a long time ago, or just move on?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. People are trying to protect their belief in a just world. And so they downplay or dismiss the very real ongoing effects of historical oppression.
It's kind of like they're saying that any inequality that we see today is just a result of like personal choices.
Right.
It's not the system.
Exactly. It's not the system. It's just like individual failings. But that completely ignores the fact that the system was designed to advantage certain groups.
Right. And disadvantage others.
And disadvantage others from the very beginning.
Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize, or maybe just don't want to realize.
Right.
Is that like history plays a huge role in this.
Absolutely.
It's not just about what's happening right now.
Right.
It's about what happened in the past and how that still affects us today.
It's about the legacy of slavery and how that continues to shape our society.
And I think a lot of that comes down to what we're taught about history, or rather what we're not taught.
You're absolutely right. There is a lot of historical neglect and miseducation going on.
It's like our history books just kind of gloss over the really dark parts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they give us the highlights, like the Civil War and emancipation.
Maybe a little bit about MLK.
Yeah, a little bit about MLK.
And then it's like racism magically disappeared.
Poof, gone.
Yeah.
Right?
But what about everything that happened after slavery ended?
Exactly. What about the black codes?
Jim Crow.
Redlining.
Mass incarceration.
All of these things are direct consequences of slavery.
But they never really talk about that.
They don't talk about it, and without that historical context, it becomes really easy to dismiss discussions of racial disparities as just complaining.
Yeah, like people are just whining or something.
Exactly.
But it's so much more than that.
It's so much more than that. It's about fighting for justice and equity.
It's about recognizing that the past is not really the past.
Right. It's still with us.
It's still shaping our present in so many ways.
Absolutely. It's like they're looking at a tree but only seeing the leaves.
Oh, yeah.
They're missing the roots that feed the tree.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
You know, you have to have the roots or the whole tree will die.
Right. It makes me think about all those arguments about like personal responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Versus the system.
Right.
It's always just pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Work harder.
Yeah.
Make better choices.
But it completely ignores all these systemic barriers that are in place.
Exactly.
It's like telling someone to swim across a river,
Oh, yeah.
but not even acknowledging that there's a current pushing against them.
A strong current.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people might be strong enough to make it across,
Right.
but for most people, it's just an impossible task.
And it's like the people who benefit the most from the system, they tend to get really defensive when you start talking about these issues.
Of course they do.
Like it's a personal attack on them.
Yeah, it challenges their whole worldview.
Because they've always been told that success is just an individual thing.
Exactly.
So if you say that the system is rigged,
Right.
then it makes them question their own achievements.
Nobody wants to do that.
Right. So it's easier to just double down on this idea of personal responsibility.
Right. If you're not succeeding, it's your own fault.
Exactly.
But that completely ignores all of the systemic factors.
And it ends up blaming the victims instead of looking at the real causes of inequality.
Absolutely.
So frustrating.
It is. It's like telling someone who's drowning that they should learn to swim better.
Exactly.
You know, it completely misses the point.
Yeah.
So we have to look at the context. We have to look at the systemic factors.
We have to look at the history.
Exactly.
And I think that's a big part of the problem. A lot of people just don't know the history.
Yeah. Or they've been taught a very sanitized version of history.
Right. It's like they're missing huge chunks of information.
Exactly.
So how does politics play into all of this?
Well, research has shown that racial resentment plays a big role.
Ew, really?
Yeah. In how people view discussions of race and slavery.
So you're saying that someone's political beliefs can actually influence how they see racism?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So like it's not just about the facts anymore.
No, it's about how those facts are filtered through their political lens.
It's like those echo chambers you see online.
Exactly.
Where everybody's just reinforcing each other's biases.
Yeah. And so you have people who genuinely believe that Black people are just stuck in the past.
Yeah. Get over it already.
Exactly.
But that's so far from the truth.
It's a dangerous oversimplification.
So what can we do to like push back against this mentality?
I think the first step is education.
Okay.
We need to learn the real history.
Not just the sugar-coated version.
Exactly.
So like read books, watch documentaries.
Yeah. There's so many resources available these days.
Listen to podcasts like this one.
Right.
And then when we encounter people who have these dismissive attitudes, we need to be ready to challenge them.
Yes, but in a way that's constructive.
Not just like getting angry or shutting down.
Oh, I don't know. We need to have these conversations.
So explain to them why those statements are harmful.
Exactly.
Why they're wrong.
We need to help people understand that saying get over slavery is not just insensitive, it's ignorant.
It's like they don't even realize the impact that slavery continues to have on our society.
They're completely dismissing the lived experiences of millions of people.
And I think it also comes down to empathy.
Oh, absolutely.
Like really trying to see the world through someone else's eyes.
We have to be willing to step outside of our own comfort zones.
And acknowledge our own biases.
Because we all have biases.
Right. It's not about blaming anybody.
It's about understanding.
It's about understanding the history and the systems.
And working together to create a more just and equitable society.
It's like we're always trying to protect how we see the world.
Yeah, it's like we want to believe that things make sense, that there's some kind of order.
In fairness.
Right, fairness. Like we want the world to fit into these neat little boxes.
Yeah. And when something comes along and like challenges that,
right,
we get defensive.
Exactly. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't fit my narrative.
And so telling Black people to just get over slavery,
right,
it's kind of like trying to force that issue into that box.
It's like oversimplifying a really complex issue to make it fit into a worldview that doesn't threaten their sense of how the world works.
So they can keep believing that it's a just world.
That everything's fair.
That everybody has the same opportunities.
Yeah, it's like this comforting story, even though it's not true.
But we know that's not the reality.
No, not at all. It's an illusion, and it can be a really dangerous one.
Because then we never really get to the root of the problem.
Exactly. We're just putting Band-Aids on the symptoms.
So how do we break free from that?
I think it starts with humility.
Okay.
Being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers.
That we don't know everything.
Right.
That we could be wrong.
Exactly.
And like really listening to other people.
Yeah.
Especially people who have had different experiences than our own.
Absolutely. We need to create spaces where people feel safe sharing their stories without feeling judged.
And it's not about being afraid of these conversations.
Right.
It's about seeing them as an opportunity.
Yeah, to grow, to
and
connect, and to build a better society.
So this whole deep dive has been a lot
It has.
We've talked about cognitive dissonance,
System justification,
historical neglect.
the myth of meritocracy.
It's been a lot to process.
It has, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we can't shy away from these conversations about race.
You can't just ignore them and hope they go away.
Exactly. Silence only protects the status quo.
We have to speak up.
We have to challenge those harmful narratives.
And fight for a world that's fairer for everyone.
Absolutely.
And it starts with understanding ourselves.
Yeah.
Our own biases.
It's our blind spots.
So to everybody listening out there,
yeah.
keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Read books. Watch documentaries.
Listen to podcasts.
Engage with people who see the world differently than you do.
And remember, this is not about blame. It's not about guilt.
It's about understanding.
It's about empathy and taking action together.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, keep questioning
Keep learning.
and keep pushing for a better world.
Absolutely.